Hello guys. I'd like to, in this video, make some further remarks about the first part of Chapter 8 of Wilhelmsen's book, Man's Knowledge of Reality. I want to focus in here on some claims he makes about the nature of matter in Section 3 of Chapter 8. So I'll begin by picking up on an idea that I mentioned in a previous video, that knowledge involves a union between the knower and the known in the order of intentionality. This requires then that we acknowledge that there is an intentional mode of being, which is different from the physical mode of being. There can't just be the physical mode. We can't make sense of knowledge as this intentional event otherwise. And I spoke in that other video about the greater dignity that applies to the object as known, the way it is welcomed into, integrated into the self-knowing whole that is the knower's mind. There's a sense in which, when the moons of Jupiter were first discovered, they became for the first time objects of human knowledge. They went from being simply floating bodies of rock in space to being something now which has a place in the human world, not just in the human cultural world, but in the human order of knowledge. Human knowledge of the cosmos now includes these things where previously it had not included them. There's a sense in which they've reached their final destination, perhaps, as intentional objects in the order of a comprehensive knowing being, among the highest beings in the universe. To try to understand this more clearly, let me pull an idea into this conversation that I've introduced in a video about another book for another course, about different levels of interaction between beings. We can think of three different levels of interaction. We can think of physical objects. Physical objects have a very simple way of interacting with each other. They simply press on each other. Their mode of interacting with the world is simply by immediate physical contact with other objects. This is limiting then to the surface area of the object that we're speaking about. Second level would be, I think, living things, especially animals, which have senses and motion, which are able to interact with objects at a distance. So the gazelle is able to sense the prey and flee from it. The lion is able to detect the predator. The predator is able to detect the prey. So there's this possibility of distance interaction among animals at their level of being, but it's still limited to the individual animal and its senses, and it's limited to the matter that makes up those senses, the sense organs and the medium by which that sensation takes place, light in the case of vision. We rise to the third level of interaction, however. This is the level of knowers and knowing beings. Knowing beings are capable of grasping the essence of things. Now, they're also capable of grasping themselves as knowers and the whole of reality and God, the comprehensive grasp of things. And they do all three of these in a way that transcends the physical body of the individual entirely. I don't have to be connected to this particular body to do this kind of knowing. So this is a great leap in the level of interaction and in the comprehensiveness of the interaction and the more comprehensive relatability that knowing beings have to the cosmos. A human mind can know itself and the whole of things and individual things within that cosmos in a much more comprehensive and fuller way, relating everything to everything else, a philosophical way we might say, than any kind of animal being or purely physical object. In the other video, I also made reference to the idea that from Wilhelmsen's section 3 of chapter 8, that there are two ways in which matter limits knowing. First, simply because a material object just is what it is. It is in itself, in Sartre's language, being in itself. It is uncomplicated. It doesn't have any sort of inner principle of development or any sort of drive to grasp more than what it is. It simply is what it is. Its being is given to it. The second principle I mentioned is that the more beings are bound to their matter, to their material constitution, the less freedom they have to transcend that material being in knowing, in the actuality of knowing. Let's take a look at the passage I'm thinking about at the end of section 3. This is on page 79, if you've got the book with you. Wilhelmsen writes, matter, whatever does this job of individuation, what restricts, limits form to this rather than that, is the principle which we've given the name matter. Matter, understood in this cosmological sense, is the root principle of restriction in material nature. Okay, so this is the part I want to focus in on, and perhaps take this to one of our discussion boards later on. The idea that matter for Wilhelmsen is a cosmological principle. This is different from our usual way of thinking about matter. I think we as Americans have kind of a background positivist understanding of matter. We think of matter as extension. We think of matter just as being the stuff of which a thing is made. And Wilhelmsen, I think, is alerting us here to the fact that he's using matter here in a more comprehensive metaphysical sense. He's talking about a principle that restricts an essence to this particular location, this particular matter. It's a principle of individuation. It's what makes this pencil, this pen, this particular pen. It restricts its penny essence to this particular bit of plastic and ink. So Wilhelmsen goes on to say that among material things, the more material they are, the more closely bound to their material constitution, their being is, the less they are free to rise above that in transcendence. We can imagine a kind of sliding scale, a hierarchy of beings, some of which are more bound to their materiality and some of which are less bound to their materiality. We might even think of a kind of spiritual and mental progress that's involved if we ourselves can move slightly up that scale to become less attached to bodily things, to become rational masters of our drives, for example. We might also compare this to what I said previously about these three levels of interaction. We can think about physical things, inanimate things, and animals, which have less mind, or no mind in the case of physical things, less mind in the case of animals, and more matter and body. That is to say, the mental lives of animals, such as they are very closely bound to their individual and species being, to their material reality, to their instincts as an expression of that species being. So the foxes are, as it were, genetically hardwired to chase rabbits. Robins are hardwired to build nests at a particular time and in a particular way. They may, I suppose, feel free in their own little bird minds, but what's happening here is that the material reality of their genetic inheritance is driving them to behave in these ways. They're not free to know the nest or the rabbit or anything else about themselves in the world they live in the way that a knowing mind, which is capable of transcending its physicality, is able to do. That's just another way of saying that animal knowledge is not human knowledge. Human knowledge involves this immaterial aspect. The question I'll leave you with then deals, though, with this cosmological problem. How is matter as a cosmological principle different from other definitions of matter? And what kind of mistakes might we make if we were to adopt some other cruder or more common understanding of matter and try to interpret the claims Wilhelmsen makes in this chapter using that definition of matter? And then perhaps a third question, how could we challenge other people to develop or alter their understanding of the concept matter in order to make it compatible with or make it amenable to understanding the kind of claims that Wilhelmsen is making here, giving them a fair hearing and evaluating them to see whether they are true or not. So that's the end of my commentary here, some additional commentary on Chapter 8, Section 3 of Man's Knowledge of Reality. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.